So, welcome to this episode of Menopause Conversations. My name is Amantha King. I'm a workplace menopause consultant and I'm an executive performance coach. I'm delighted to have my friend and colleague. Some might say we're a competitor, Niki, but I don't see us like that. Do you? I don't think you do you?
Not.
No. I would like to introduce my wonderful guest, Niki Woods. I was really keen to get Niki on because she has an amazing book, the Man's Guide to Menopause, which honestly I think is a fantastic addition to the heaving bookshelves of menopause. In fact, there aren't many books for men, but I was keen to get Niki on so she could talk to us a little bit more about her book, about what she does, and about why it's so important. So, Niki, please introduce yourself and tell the people listening who you are, what it is you do, and how is it that you're actually in the menopause space. So, if you can tell us those three things, that'd be amazing.
Thank you so much. I am an executive wellness coach and a menopause educator. I work both with individuals and with businesses, and as you just said, author of The Man's Guide to Menopause as well, which I kind of added in after working mainly originally with women. I'm trained as a PT and nutritionist as well. So when I work with the individual female clients, obviously we cover a lot of the kind of the whole of how they can be well. And inevitably, you end up talking about menopause and perimenopause. And inevitably, then they'll talk about how that's impacted on their relationships. Likewise, when I'm talking with businesses, we always end up in a situation where a few men might come or they might be forced to come for manager training. And then at the end, they feel so empowered by the knowledge, but then getting all this feedback as well that they hadn't got anything just for themselves. So that's kind of why I got involved in the man's side of things then, as well as just the kind of the general women's side of things.
Yeah, amazing. Can I read a quote from your book? Can I have
Yeah.
permission? So on page 3, you say that many of the men I spoke to told me that gaining a better understanding of what was going on helped them not just to support their partner, but also help them cope with any difficulties their partner's menopause brought to their relationship, even in circumstances where it didn't change the situation. Because that really is the elephant in the room, isn't it? I was in a corporate workplace yesterday. Definitely more women. There was a good group of representation of men and younger people, I would like to say. But actually, we still have a lot of taboo and maybe men thinking this isn't relevant to them, doesn't really concern them, and yet we know that you probably will have relationships, even if it's not intimate relationships. You will have women in your life. You'll have your mother, your sister, your aunties. This affects 51% of the global population, and indirectly, I think 100% of us. So I mean, what do you think the barriers are, Niki, for men engaging with the topic? I mean, I like it when people go, "Oh, men." Actually, we're in the conversation already. Menopause has the word men in it, and menstruation, by the way. So you're in it whether you want to be or not. But what are the obstacles do you feel in terms of men engaging with the topic of menopause?
I think fear, stigma also really do still play a part. I think there's a real fear of saying the wrong thing if they do get involved. And I also think that they worry that they maybe shouldn't be in the space. So I don't know about you, but when I speak to organizations and they say, well, it's really difficult to get men to join in a conversation or whatever, I'm like, yeah, but actually to start with, you need to give them their own safe space to discuss these things without trying to plunk everyone together, because the men are really worried that the women will be resistant to them being there and that they have no right to be in that space and that they're going to say the wrong thing. There is, of course, the men who don't think that it's relevant until it's a bit too late and they suddenly go, God, I wish I'd learned that earlier. But I think there is also that kind of, oh, this is women's stuff, we shouldn't interfere, we shouldn't know about it, which obviously that's not the case, but I do think that that is a barrier to men. And then also I think that there's a bit of an assumption that if there was something they needed to know, that they'd know it, and that they just would know it almost. But then when you get to the end of, say, an awareness session or a discussion with managers, and there's been men in the room, they always are like, oh my God, I learned so much. I'm going home to talk to my wife now. And it's just like this kind of, wow, I didn't realize this is such a big thing, even if their wife maybe had been trying to tell them before, or they just maybe hadn't realized, or the wife themselves didn't have the words to explain some of it, which I do think is a barrier, that sometimes the woman doesn't know how to talk about it, so it stops the man becoming involved in the conversation, either at home or at work, because of the fact that she's just not known how to welcome him into the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. I mean, we know there are some powerful statistics, but 8 out of 10 women don't even tell their partners, either their same-sex partners or male partners, that they're experiencing this difficulty. It's not easy to keep under wraps when you think that on average, most people with female biology going through any part of this transition have about 8 symptoms concurrently side by side going around for 14 months and possibly up to 2 years before you get a diagnosis. I mean, before we even came on the call, we always have a little debrief, don't we, about how we are, because we both ourselves have complex menopause status. So you're right, it must be really, really difficult. And I agree with you, Niki. June Potts and myself were in some sessions recently, and there's the emotion runs high when you create a space for men to feel vulnerable, because they're game faithing a lot of the time. When we think about the motivations for people to come to work, it's not always about the money. Sometimes it's about the connection. Sometimes it's about putting a bit of distance between yourself and what you're dealing with at home. Some people come for that escapism element. So tell us, Niki, in your opinion, how do we create environments where people feel they can? What would it take for people to feel like, yeah, do you know what? I could go to an all men's session. What would need to motivate that person? What would we need to do to motivate that person to come along?
I think the first thing is to really understand that the same barriers to getting men to come to a menopause session are the same barriers that are getting men to talk about their general mental health and their general well-being.
Yeah.
I think, for example, when I was speaking to, I interviewed a lot of men as research for my book, and not all of their stories are in there. And I had some really moving conversations with men who had never with anyone shared some of the difficulties within their relationships. And they probably never will again, because it's so personal and does, like you say, make them feel very vulnerable. So I think we have to understand that someone's capacity to share, capability, preparedness to share the very personal bits, it's not going to happen until they feel very, very, very safe. We need to coax them in with the more general information, potentially sell the benefits, but yeah, it's quite hard to sort of, some people feel like you shouldn't talk too much about the personal stuff at work. So sometimes you do have to get people in, starting to talk to men in terms of your management stuff, your being a good colleague, and then slowly, bit by bit, some of the more personal stuff will come out, because I think there is more of a barrier for men talking about their interpersonal relationships, difficulties within it, than there are for women many times. But it's also, even some women won't want to talk about their emotional side of things at work. I just think we've got to understand that men are even less likely to. And I do believe it's really helpful to get some information to people by almost like by osmosis. So with a woman, it's really easy to put like posters in toilets, things like that. It's harder to do that with men. You can use in the workplace, the screensavers, etc., with information. But it's about getting the conversations, not necessarily in a massive load of detail, but just having the words said more commonly make people feel safer to talk about those things. And if the word menopause is spoken more in an organization, then men as well as women are then going to feel more safe to ask questions about it. And I think that I always think that if you try, a lot of organizations, they'll try and put everyone, here's an awareness session, come if you want. The men won't come, they won't understand why. And you do need to say, we need a man-only session to start with, and we probably need more than one, because some men will come to the first one, but not that many. And you'll need to do several so that they'll feel safe to come, because the first people who'll come, the mavens, they will then potentially tell the others, oh, it was really good. I didn't expect to learn so much. Oh, I figured that I knew what this was about, and it's really opened my eyes. And I went home and talked to my wife. and wow. And then the next time you do a session, those men are going to feel safe to go because they're not the first. And you've just got to do it trickle by trickle, I think.
Yeah, and I think this sort of leans into you can't be the one and done type approach, which I know we both agree with, because it just doesn't work. I mean, June and I have seen the most amazing and experienced the most powerful stories in sessions largely dominated by men, you know, and particularly in industries where maybe you don't think they would be talking about menopause. So, you know, some of the more male dominated environments, it's important because you know, you're not going to access this knowledge anywhere else. You know, we always say how many people's mothers told them about menopause. Very few women put their hands up. So if the women aren't being told, there's slim to no chance that men are going to know about this. And we have people have real light bulb moments whereby they realised, you know what, the relationship difficulties we've been having for the last 6 months, it's either coincidence or consequence that they line up at exactly the same time that your partner's perimenopause or your levels of intimacy are dropping, or you're just arguing more, or your kids are going through exams, etc., etc., etc. It's about, if you at least have this on your radar, you can at least ask the questions, what's the impact? And that's all before we get into the workplace. So from your point of view, Niki, what's the benefit of really getting to grips with menopause for men in the workplace?
In the workplace, well, it's going to make them better managers, better colleagues. It's going to mean likely that everyone's working relationships improve, that performance improves, retention improves, because everyone's going to be happier and feel more supported. Within the workplace, I think that it's often that the skills that make someone a good manager or a good colleague are the same skills that they will use in these situations. We just need to empower them with the knowledge about menopause and give them the confidence to know they can use those skills in that situation. So the empathy, the active listening, the open questions, all of that stuff, which again works at home as well. Those are all the qualities that someone needs to have to be a good manager, understanding how to hold sensitive conversations, etc. The problem is when men in the workplace are too scared to talk about menopause, or don't know about menopause, and don't recognize some signs or symptoms, or don't feel empowered to discuss and signpost, they don't use those skills they've already got.
Yes.
So that's part of what we do, you and I, and people like us, is we're giving people the permission to use the skills they've already got and layering on top the knowledge and how to signpost and maybe some specific information that they didn't have before. And obviously, that means that when you've got good management support, you're going to feel more secure having more open conversations about what support you might need. You're going to be able to perform better. You're going to be less stressed as an employee. And the employee management discussions are all going to be more productive as well.
Oh, I 100% agree. I love that. And if I could add to that, is that, you know, organizations, you know, it's similar to mental health. But again, I think if that's largely seen as tick boxing in organizations, it doesn't translate into people's management style. We heard some stories very, very recently about, you know, people, you know, organizations are going through change. You know, they might be downsizing, there might be redundancies, there might be you know, wholesale changes that really, really affect people. And I know people go through all sorts of calibration and stuff like this. If you're not factoring in actually what people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, that actually then puts you into quite dangerous ground. And it would be important for us to acknowledge. I mean, only last week, a school teacher won her tribunal. She got £60,000. I think it's the tip of the iceberg, quite honestly, because organisations need to wake up to the idea that actually you can't do what you've always done with people. You do need to factor in what are the things that people are navigating during midlife. And I'm sure you've heard stories like this too, whereby people are looking after elderly relatives. Maybe their relationships have broken down because it's just too late. They didn't get access to the right information at the right time. You know, you might have children leaving home. That's certainly my situation. I've got one daughter who's doing her A levels. I'm going to be an empty nester this time next year. So emotionally, there's a lot going on. But actually, unless you ask me those questions, you could make all sorts of assumptions about my behavior. And as I was saying to you last, only just before we started recording, I've had a few tricky sort of weeks for me, lots of traveling. I'm quite stressed out. I've got a lot of priorities and a lot of things to do. My symptoms have come back. So, you know, we need people to understand that it takes time, doesn't it? And actually, you will be postmenopause for all of your life once you're there. So, how much, again, I know it's not related specifically to men, but do you ever sense that we sort of really over egg the perimenopause bit and maybe the menopause bit? I mean, do we put anywhere near enough focus on what it's like to maybe be postmenopausal?
I think it's a great question, and actually it feeds into something that I've been working with an organization on, about kind of better aging and that period of time that we are postmenopausal. Some of the more wonky symptoms may have disappeared because obviously perimenopause is sometimes when things seem to catch us unawares, but we've got, 15, 20 years of employment postmenopausal that we may still be having some issues to do with our fact that we're postmenopausal that are obvious, but other things are the interplay with aging. And it comes to the fact that if we are supporting effectively that portion of our workforce, really most of the skills and the kind of adjustments, they're not even adjustments, and understanding that we're bringing actually is going to benefit people who are men as well. Because we've got sandwich generation, yeah, maybe women are disproportionately affected in terms of the amount of caring responsibilities compared to men, but it doesn't mean they're not affected at all by it. And if we think of people in their 50s, people in their 60s, we need to make sure that organizations are valuing those people and giving them, for example, flexible working or any support they need, because it is a different stage of life. We do have different health concerns, but like you say, we do have different life concerns. And to bring it back to men, they're not going to be able to communicate some of that potentially as well as women as well if they don't feel safe to do it. So if we can have better conversations generally, then hopefully, even if it's not obvious that we're doing it, we're making the men who are struggling with the same sorts of pressures more likely to say things as well. And obviously, as we're getting older, we do potentially struggle with different things. And we do then, not just women, men as well. So what's the interplay of aging and what's menopause? Don't know. But what we do know is we want to actually support people because they've got loads of value for the organization. And you want to be able to support people to be able to work as long as they want to and as effectively as they want to.
Yeah, that is so true. And I was talking to, I don't know if you know Sharon Seville. She's an award-winning recruiter, and we were having a chit chat last week. And we were saying that actually, when you look at the employment environment, it's an inverted triangle. Back in the day, we had lots of young people, an aging population, and a small population of elderly people. It's now completely turned on its head. We have less younger people because the birth rate has dropped. We've got this midlife group of people, which then meets a massive group of older individuals. And so the reality is, that 50 something market, we're not getting people back. It's not retracted at all in the last 4 years. So people are leaving work, they're drawing down on their pensions, they may be paying off their mortgages, and they're going, you know what, stuff it, I'm not going back. So you're right, there is this hemorrhaging of talent, female and male, I think, in a lot of cases. I mean, I certainly know I live in an equitable household where it's not just my job to do the internet shopping, it's not my job to empty the dishwasher. It's about, we live in different times now where men and women equally are bearing the responsibility of looking after our parents or elderly family members. So you're right, Niki. So in terms of, can I ask you, in terms of how easy was it to get men to contribute to your book in terms of their stories? Is that something you found relatively easier or hard? Because I tried to set up a men's group and I did have interest, but then I think people suddenly thought, actually, I don't know that I want to go on a group call and share. People are more likely to come in a one-to-one. So how did you find it easy to get people to come and contribute?
So what you've just said basically echoes the experience I've had in terms of if you try and get men in a group setting to talk about something like my Facebook group, for example, you are much less likely to get them in there than people coming and talking to me individually. So I didn't have any issues whatsoever with people talking to me individually for my book.
Yeah.
I had loads of people share things they'd not shared before, some people that I kind of knew already, some people that I really didn't. The people I knew already were less likely to want to tell me the super intimate things than people I didn't know, actually. But in terms of them wanting to kind of be publicly saying some of this struggle, that's very, very, very different. And I think that actually feeds into something that touches on what you were just saying about people in midlife and older, that we know we've got women massively leaving the workforce, and we know we've got the highest rates of divorce in midlife. And everyone's talking very obviously about what that can mean for organizations and for people in terms of what's happening with the women. But what about the men in that? Well, that means there's loads of men who are alone and unhappy, who potentially are having to run a single person household for the first time in their lives, will feel very alone, very unsupported potentially, and economically might not feel that they can leave work because they maybe are having to pay child maintenance, something like that. So actually, you've got a load of people still at work that don't feel safe at this point to share how they're feeling, who might be secretly really struggling and struggling even more potentially than us women are in some ways, which is showing in the suicidality statistics, for example, potentially. And organizations don't realize, because they're paying all this attention to, well, we know these things about women and women leaving, etc. And again, it comes back to, if we can talk more to men before all this happens about, for example, the menopause, what it might mean in terms of the relationships outside, then some of these breakups might not happen. Or even if they do, they've learn other skills during that time around communication and around self-care. That means if the relationship does break up, at least you've got the man in a situation where he feels more able to talk about things and more able to communicate. So I actually see that talking to men and making men understand menopause so they can support women better also means they understand how to support themselves better and how to self-care better, which is better for them as people, but also better for organizations.
Yeah, agreed. I love that. I really love that, Nikki. It's a really good point. And what we know is really that, for men, there's a whole few generations of men that have just missed out on all of that. My husband came home the other day. He went, "Oh my God, I've just listened to Dr. Lisa Mosconi talking to Stephen Bartlett." And apparently, Stephen Bartlett knew nothing about the
It's
menstrual
hilarious.
cycle. It was hilarious. But in a way, I'm not judging him. He's of a generation where it hasn't been taught in PHSE, sex education. Obviously, thanks to people like Diane Dancerbrink of menopausesupport.co.uk, we know that all secondary school children in their PHSE will now have discussions around what menopause is. And I'm pleased to see that I definitely see in my sessions we have a lot more younger people coming in, younger women, younger men, and that is fantastic. Transgender community, I think we're starting to open up safer spaces for people to talk. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You only know what you know, and if you don't know anything, that's the sum total of your education. But we know that it can really be helpful for people to understand. So your book is wonderful in that way. What were the challenges writing your book? When you look back, because I mean, it's an amazing achievement to have written a book. Everyone I speak to who's done it just says, it takes a lot out of you. What specifically do you recall being the challenges about getting this book done in the way that you wanted to?
So I didn't find writing it challenging. I found finishing it challenging because
Okay.
life stuff happened. So I actually wrote it, well, to start with, I had the idea for bloody ages and didn't do anything about it because I was like, I can't write a book. Like that whole like who's she to write a book. When I actually wrote it, I found the writing it really easy. I love doing, like, because it's referenced, I loved like pulling the referencing together, everything. I loved speaking to the people. I felt really honoured that some of the men who shared their stories with me.
Yeah.
But then I bought a house and renovated it, and so I didn't do anything on the book for 11 months. And that was the thing. I had this 90% written book for 11 months, just sat there. And that was my challenge. So actually it worked quite well, because when I went back to finish it, I also like edited it myself because I couldn't remember what I'd written,
Because you're
and redid it.
self-published. Yeah. I love your last statement, your love line in the book. The Man's Guide to Menopause is Niki's first book. She pinky promises any future books won't be accompanied by more house buying.
Because that's the problem. It would have been out a year earlier. And that was the thing. That was my biggest challenge. It was, I did have to check. There'd been a bit more research about things. That's the biggest challenge with everything. You always want to keep going and putting
Yes.
new stuff in as it comes out. Um, Obviously, because it's self-published and self-PR'd, one of the biggest challenges is people knowing it exists.
Yes.
I loved writing it. I really did. And I was in two minds as to whether I needed to kind of make it obvious that it's really helpful for women to read as well.
Yeah.
And something that I felt I wanted to make sure through it, and I think I've got the right kind of.
Oh,
I
you
wanted
so
to teach men concepts, but I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't like mansplaining to them, and that also I made sure that I wasn't man bashing, because I feel like there were so many men in there who were doing such amazing things to try and support their partners, that I wanted to make sure they understood that how they could do that better, but also how they could support themselves better.
right, great. So nice lead in. Let's talk a bit about that then, because the whole men bashing thing, I can't bear it. I've actually walked out of a couple of meetings where I see that going on. It's very much a planned part of keynote speakers, high profile keynote speakers as well, actually, in very professional settings. I really don't like it. I think it is really disingenuous. It does a disservice to the men who actually do want to do something about it. Yes, as in all stages of life, there's always going to be the small group or maybe a larger group who don't walk the talk, who do the tick boxing and all the rest of it. I'm not looking to engage with those people. I'm looking to engage with the groups of people and men, and I don't know if I speak for you as well, Niki, which who actually do want to do the right thing, who do want to do the right thing, maybe don't know how to do it, are a little bit scared, a little bit trepidatious, but you know what? Happy to bring consultants like ourselves in, um, to actually get that conversation going and work up what good looks like as a team effort, like you would for anything else. You'd get the experts in, wouldn't you? I'm always going to champion the people that want to start that conversation and move it into action, because conversations alone don't do enough. But why do you think it's so easy? Why do you think it's easy to do the whole man bashing thing? What do you think? I want to try and understand what is the concept behind that. What do you think people think they're gaining by taking that approach with men?
I think it's sometimes it happens with other situations as well, where people polarize and they're like, well, we feel we've struggled and not been listened to and hard done by. This is the group we feel did that. So therefore we're going to jump on them. And it doesn't help. But I think that's kind of where it I think comes from, as well as that sometimes there's the frustration that people haven't felt heard, and so they feel like they've said the same thing over and over and over again and it hasn't been heard. I think from where I'm coming from, I feel like am I allowed to swear?
You do what
Yeah.
you like.
I feel like men generally and on individual level have been as fucked over by this patriarchal structure that we're in as women are, but because systemically, as a whole on the macro, men seem to be the ones who are benefiting, then it's easy to go to the individual men and have a go at them when actually they don't feel like they're benefiting either. And actually, I don't think they are. I think what you've just said about the man bashing is one of the other reasons why it's really important when we try and talk to men about menopause to start with, that I think it is important to create those men only safe spaces to talk about it. Because if I'm doing a man only session and I'm talking about menopause and I'm giving information, but I'm also not just giving information about signs and symptoms and treatments. I'm talking about concepts that might be new to men, or they might feel make them a bit challenged. So if we talk about things like unequal mental load, for example, or how to be better at listening, how to, have better conversations. For some men, that can feel quite challenging to have those concepts talked to about. And I feel like if I'm the only woman in the room while I'm having this conversation with men, I can control that conversation in a way that if there was other women in the room, sometimes there's that risk that there might be someone who wants to man bash, who's going to go, yeah, da, 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 at that point, and then the men are going to pull back again, because sometimes it is quite difficult to say, well, this is the concept of mental load, this is the concept of unequal mental load, this is how it might appear in the workplace, this is how it might appear in a heterosexual relationship. And men could feel quite defensive about that. They could say, well, I feel like I do. But if you put them in a safe space, they don't. They actually think about that and listen and go, actually, yeah, I can see how that could manifest and how that could be combined with perimenopause, the straw that breaks the camel's back. But you can only do that if no one's having a go at the same time, and if you give them the space to do that. And I don't think anything's achieved by man bashing. Yeah, we might have frustrations in being mansplained to, etc. But if someone's doing their best to understand and doing the best to convey information, doing the best to listen, then I don't think there's anything gained by us having a go at them.
No, I don't either. And I think it's too generalist as well. You know, there are some men bashing, people who describe themselves as allies, male allies, using their position to actually bash other men. And I'm like, I really don't think that's help. That's not going to make anyone step forward. And you only have to look at some of the big meetings that are being held nationally. There are very few men coming into the room, very few. So we're doing something that's putting people off. I sat next to someone at a conference last year, and it was so uncomfortable in the morning, Nikki. There was a lot of man bashing. And I sat next to that person after lunch, and I went, how was that for you? And he basically said to me, I could hear the pitchforks coming out behind me. And I felt embarrassed. I genuinely felt embarrassed for that person. I thought we've not been inclusive. You know, you can bang on about DEI all you like, but if you are not making people welcome in that room, well, they're definitely not going to come back next year. And worse than that, they're not going to tell anyone to come next year. In fact, they're going to say, I wouldn't put yourself in firing line. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I also think that for men, it's about, men statistically find the whole vulnerability thing much harder anyway. Women are very good at talking, if not to their own friendship circle, to other women. And statistically, by the time men are 25, they actually do tend to have larger friendship circles than women do. But from 25 onwards, they're dwindling.
Yep.
And so these relationships can be largely superficial. So maybe coming to something organized by work that's a relatively safe place can be that one place, like you powerfully said. We've got a lot of single fathers or single people who find themselves in midlife in a different situation to maybe one they thought they were going to find themselves in. So it can feel lonely. We know loneliness is one of the biggest epidemics around. So it is powerful. I mean, from your point of view, what would be the key reasons for someone to go out and purchase this, either for their workplace library, for themselves, or to gift it to someone else? What's the power really within the pages, Nikki?
I think one of the things is I'm gonna put this out there. It's quality information, and it's quality information in one place. And those, like you were talking about, welcoming men into the conversation, and I feel like one of the things that I very often was hearing from men before was, even if they thought they wanted to know something and they wanted to look online or whatever, they felt like they were getting information for women that they maybe shouldn't be looking at, or they were peeking into something. And so it is giving them quality information, but it's also giving them information that's clearly for them, even though some of it's the same information as for a woman would receive.
Yes.
But then also, because of the specific chapters in there about how to communicate about things, I have written them from the perspective of how a man can communicate it with a woman. And also with the sex, intimacy and libido chapter, I don't think that many women are very comfortable talking about those things and might not even know about some of the things that are in that chapter. So it means that those people are getting that information, the men are getting that information that their partners may not feel comfortable talking to them about. And so they're actually more empowered with knowledge. They might be able to open up conversations with their partner, or they might just have better understanding. In terms of the workplace, obviously, maybe the sex, intimacy, and libido chapter is less relevant to the workplace, but understanding how broad the symptoms could potentially be, how they could manifest, means someone can be a better colleague, a better manager, be more empathetic. And I just really felt like there's so many men who wanted something like, I always say it's a Haynes
Oh, like the
guide,
car
Haynes
manuals.
manual. Yeah,
Yeah.
car manual. That was exactly what it was. Where I was like, there's a lot of men who really want to understand and they want to get to the nitty gritty so they properly understand it. And it's about having one place where they can go and get that information and then take it forward with some skills in there about how they can use that information, be it at work or at home.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I would also say I did a talk yesterday on resilience, and at the heart of resilience is well-being. And for men, sexual intimacy is massive. So actually, I would say it is very much a workplace topic. I certainly would not shy away from talking about that because I think that's what that's probably the biggest signposter for men. Actually, our intimacy levels have dropped off. What's that about? And so maybe it would be easy to assume it's the kids, it's her work, it's blah, blah, blah. But actually, maybe if it's something to do with us, well, then that's really powerful. And I always found with my husband, when we saw that menopause was that was something that was coming between us, we were able to feel more stronger together. It was not me, you, and the menopause. I always tended to describe it at its worst. It was like having an unwelcome visitor in your house that you didn't know it was coming and arriving. It's now here, and you don't actually know when it's leaving. Um, I think when we found a way to live around it as a couple, that's when it became really powerful. And what I also like, which is, it's just morely a visual thing. It's really digestible. And I know that's important for guys because if it looks like War and Peace, they may not feel as inclined to pick it up. But it's really, really
And
powerful. Yes.
that bit there's references, so actually it's even
It's
less.
shorter. It's even shorter. So even better. I mean, and so it has been written with men in mind. And I think it's wonderful that you've taken the time to do it. And congratulations on
Thank you.
bringing it into the world because it's really, really powerful. So I think, it's going to be something that when people know that it actually is here and it exists, because let's be honest, with self-publishing, we don't have a big machine of publishers behind us to do it. I've always wanted to write a book. I know I've got one in me. I should take a screen grab. In fact, let me just do that whilst we're on the call because that would be great for later. So if you hold yours up, Niki. Um, so yeah, I think it's powerful. It's definitely going to go on my reading list that we take into workplaces because I think there's room for more than one workplace menopause consultant. So it's really lovely knowing Niki because we always have great conversations, medical conversations, don't we, Niki? I don't think people realise just to what extent we know about this topic. But how can people know more about you and feed into more about what you do? You wear many, many hats. You're also a personal trainer. There's very little you don't know about the topic. How can people find out more about you?
My main platform, I'd say, is LinkedIn. So I'm Niki with 1K Woods on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, Niki Woods Best Midlife. You can look me up on my website, nikiwoods.com. But really, my first point of contact for most people is LinkedIn. And I kind of prefer that environment in terms of we can have some more detailed, longer conversations about things as well.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely brilliant. So as always, we're going to put some stuff in the show notes. We're going to put all Niki's socials. I would strongly recommend you link in with her, follow the work that she does. She does great work. And you, like me, you like to look around and bring as much knowledge into your post. You write amazing posts. So I love reading those too. So for now, Niki Woods, I'd love to have you back because we'd love to do more talks about sort of the, you know, maybe the complexities around treatments, particularly HRT, that one size definitely doesn't fit all in that area. So maybe we get you back for a part two. But for now, Niki Woods, author of The Man's Guide to Menopause. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much for a great chat.
Thank you.